I learned the hard way. You're like, yes, I'm going to lower the blood acidity and optimize my workout capacity to the max. To the max. 2 scoops of pre-workout, 2 teaspoons of sodium bicarbonate, 1 set on the leg press. Yeah, luckily there was a bucket close to me. Welcome to Vigorous Supplementation and Performance Enhancing Drugs. I'm Coach Steve. Let's discuss 3 unconventional pre-workouts that can take your exercise performance and workout capacity to the next level. Now, the biology behind some of these supplements and PEDs and the metabolic pathways that they try to optimize, it might be a little bit difficult to translate that into a YouTube video. And, if I were to do it correctly, this video would probably be like 2 or 3 hours long. So I would highly advise you to do your own research after watching this video if you're interested in incorporating some of these supplements or PEDs for yourself, because the biology and the metabolic pathways are, quite in depth and require a decent amount of research so you understand how they exactly work. So I'll glance over the biology behind it briefly, but it's definitely not going to be the full story. So please, again, additional research is required. Now, we can break it up, these unconventional pre-workouts, up into 3 separate topics. One of them being optimizing mitochondrial function for ATP production. ATP stands for Adenosine Tri-Phosphate, which is the main energy source of the body. Another method is to bypass mitochondria completely and just supply ATP directly. But let's start with optimizing the acid buffer, which is present in skeletal muscle and in the bloodstream first. Because without optimizing this part of the process, the increased amount of metabolic waste products that you're producing when you're optimizing mitochondrial function or supply ATP directly, they increase acidity levels in skeletal muscle, and that gives you diminishing returns. It's the acidity that prevents optimal workout capacity. So even though you're trying to increase workout performance, the increased acidity limits the potential of the workout performance that you're trying to improve. So we'll have to look at first. We're trying to regulate acidity levels in skeletal muscle and in the bloodstream, allowing for the optimal amount of excretion of these metabolic waste products through the kidneys or the liver in the form of bile acid. Now, I'm sure most of you guys are familiar with beta-alanine, which is, a horrible pre-workout because it gives you all this tingling and paresthesia. It's not very enjoyable for the first 15 or 20 minutes, especially when you take them in the recommended dosages of 2,000 milligrams to even 4,000 milligrams beta-alanine. But it does have some merits. It does work, I'll be honest, it does work, because beta-alanine supplies building blocks for carnosine production. Of course, carnosine is very prevalent in skeletal muscle, and when carnosine breaks down, it helps to regulate the acid buffer in response to rising lactic acid concentrations, which is a metabolic byproduct of glucose when you convert glucose into ATP. So as you're burning glucose, lactic acid concentrations goes up. You can actually use lactate for ATP production, but it's not very optimal. It's usually a last resort because it likes to oxidize stuff in ATP production, and you don't need oxygen to convert lactate into ATP. So again, you see how complicated the biology gets. I'll try to keep it simple for you guys. Even me, sometimes I get a little bit confused with the biology behind ATP. It's people go to university for this for years on end. So if I missed something, again, my apologies. So beta-alanine provides building blocks for carnosine, but it works systemically and it gives you terrible paresthesia. And honestly, guys, I really can't get into the groove of training intensely and focus on my working sets when I'm suffering from all this tingling and pins and needles on my skin. Even though beta-alanine works, there are better ways to supply carnosine, and you can do that in the form of injectable L-Carnosine. But you'll have to administer that directly into the muscle you're going to train. Now, ideally, you start at the lowest effective dose of double digits, not triple digits. And you'll have to do double digits in each part of the muscle that you're going to train. So instead of doing beta-alanine for, fingers crossed that you get some sort of carnosine increase within the muscle that you're going to train, meanwhile you're suffering through this paresthesia at the beginning of your workout, you can also supply carnosine directly in the form of injectable carnosine. Now, the dosages are spaced pretty far between. It highly depends on you and how much of a carnosine store you're able to build up, perhaps with beta-alanine previous to starting this protocol, or, you could potentially hold, or how much lactic acid you're producing, which depletes carnosine stores. So the dosages can be between the mid double digits to the high 4-digit numbers. So let's say between 50 to 1,000 milligrams, even 2,000 milligrams of injectable L-Carnosine. Now the problem is that injectable L-Carnosine is not very stable in solution. So most of the concentrations that you're able to find on some of the peptide websites, they're like 50 milligrams to 100 milligrams of L-Carnosine. And I would start there and increase as needed. Again, if you want 2,000 milligrams of carnosine in an injectable form, that's a pretty hefty amount of milliliters that you need to inject. So it's not exactly optimal, but the difference between, from my experience and some of my clients, between 50 to 100 milligrams of injectable L-Carnosine, you compare that to 4,000 milligrams of systemic beta-alanine, I would go with the injectable L-Carnosine first. Now, considering the voluminous of injection is pretty high, we can also lower the acidity and improve the acid buffer of the bloodstream with a simple pre-workout called sodium bicarbonate. Now, when you look into the literature of sodium bicarbonate for endurance sports, the dosages are quite high, between 10 grams to 30 grams of sodium bicarbonate, which is unpalatable to say the least. The problem with sodium bicarbonate is that it also lowers stomach acidity because you're going through the conventional route, oral ingestion. So you take, let's say, 1 teaspoon, which is about 6-7 grams of sodium bicarbonate. You take that orally, you flush that down, it will lower your stomach acidity. So you have to time the sodium bicarbonate intake in relation to your pre-workout meal and perhaps your pre-workout or intra-workout. And that makes it a little bit cumbersome, but it is a very beneficial pre-workout that is, sold over the counter. You can find it in any grocery store in the baking goods section. Just plain old sodium bicarbonate. It will help with the acid buffer in your bloodstream, allowing for lactic acid to exit skeletal muscle into the bloodstream and be excreted. An effective dose is between 1 teaspoon to maybe 2 teaspoons, which is already 15 grams of sodium bicarbonate. So ideally, you take your pre-workout meal about 1.5 hours before the workout. You let it digest, exit the stomach into the intestinal tract, follow normal digestion pathways. Then you take your sodium bicarbonate about an hour, maybe 45 minutes before your workout, which will get readily absorbed into the bloodstream through the intestinal tract. And then you have about 30 minutes left to re-acidify your stomach for your pre-workout or your intra-workout. Yeah, it gets a little bit complicated, but take it from me. Taking your pre-workout with sodium bicarbonate, you'll be vomiting left and right. And that's, of course, I learned the hard way. You're like, yes, I'm going to lower the blood acidity and optimize my workout capacity to the max. 2 scoops of pre-workout, 2 teaspoons of sodium bicarbonate, 1 set on the leg press. Yeah, luckily there was a bucket close to me. There was a trash can close to me because all my precious pre-workout and all my precious, well, it's cheap, so it's not really precious, but all my sodium bicarbonate went out into the trash can. So again, timing is crucial, but timing both compounds to help with the lactic acid buffer and promote lactic acid excretion about 45 minutes before your workout. So you inject the L-Carnosine, maybe 50 to 100 milligrams first. Feel free to increase the dose as desired. Inject that bilaterally into the muscle groups that you're going to train 45 minutes before your workout. And take 1 teaspoon or 2 teaspoons of sodium bicarbonate, 45 milligrams pre-workout, will give you the best lactic acid buffer without this annoying tingling and pins and needles. You might still get a couple burps in from the sodium bicarbonate, but I feel that's pretty terrible. And they're not any worse than burping from a, diet soda or regular soda at that. Okay, with that out of the way, let's discuss several over-the-counter supplements which help to improve mitochondrial function in ATP synthesis. The first one being Ubiquinol, which I talked about several times before in some of the Vigorous Q&As, and I actually made a video about it separately. But unfortunately, that one didn't have a disclaimer at the start of the video, and YouTube works like this. No disclaimer, no monetization. So here it is again, Ubiquinol pre-workout. Now, I've experimented with 100 milligrams, 200 milligrams, 300, 400 milligrams, even 500 milligrams of Ubiquinol pre-workout. I feel that 400 milligrams is warranted on a leg day, 300 milligrams on a back day, 200 milligrams maybe on a chest and shoulder day, and an arm day. Now, for you, that might be 100 milligrams or 200, maybe maximum 300 milligrams, because it highly depends on the amount of muscle mass that you carry and how hard you train. Now, Ubiquinol is pretty pricey, but it's certainly more potent than coenzyme Q10, which converts into Ubiquinol at about a 4-to-1 ratio. So let's say you want 400 milligrams of Ubiquinol, you'll need 1600 milligrams of coenzyme Q10, and that's probably a lot more expensive. So go with Ubiquinol. That's more bioavailable and more productive to increase your workout capacity. The way this works, Ubiquinol supplies electrons for the mitochondrial proton pump, which works in proton-electron exchange, which is part of the energy production process in ATP synthesis and AMP synthesis. That's adenosine monophosphate. Now, it's a little bit difficult to explain, so I'd highly advise you to do a little bit of research on how the proton pumps works and how this electron change contributes into ATP synthesis. I won't bore you with that. This video will be way too long, but I will tell you from first-hand experience, and so can most of my clients and some of the guys that have been following loyally Vigorous Crew for a very long time on this YouTube channel. Feel free to put your testimonial down below in the comment section on how Ubiquinol changed your life, or at least, give you a better exercise performance. So I can tell you firsthand that adding a little bit of Ubiquinol pre-workout will raise exercise performance dramatically because you're optimizing your heart, predominantly the ATP synthesis in the heart, and now the heart rate, making your heart tight. We're doing this, strenuous hypertrophy work will no longer be the rate limiting factor. So you're optimizing your heart rate. There's several other supplements and medicines which will help to optimize this process further, which we'll discuss later. But by getting your Ubiquinol in, heart rate and heart capacity will no longer be the rate limiting factor in your exercise performance. So again, we're trying to optimize the acid buffer in skeletal muscle and in the bloodstream, but we're also trying to optimize energy production in the heart as well as in skeletal muscle, obviously, but predominantly in the heart to make sure that it functions correctly and allows for the maximum amount of oxygen and nutrient delivery and lactic acid disposal. So again, increased heart function gets your exercise performance under control and allows it to get up to the maximum amount you can basically tolerate. I mean, again, bodybuilding is about how much pain and exercise strain you can tolerate so you can, stimulate protein synthesis afterwards with performance enhancing drugs or, simple protein intake. In order to increase the bioavailability and absorption rate of oral Ubiquinol, you can consider combining it with a supplement called Shilajit fulvic acid. Shilajit has the highest concentration of fulvic acid. It's found in the Himalayas, where it's extracted from the soil. You don't have to do this in a dose-dependent fashion, this combination. You can just take 250 milligrams of Shilajit fulvic acid with whatever dose of Ubiquinol you decide to take. So whether that's 100 milligrams of Ubiquinol or 400 milligrams of Ubiquinol, 250 milligrams of Shilajit fulvic acid will be sufficient to promote absorption and increase the bioavailability of the Ubiquinol. So you take that at the same time. Besides Shilajit fulvic acid, and while we're on the topic of soil-extracted supplements, PQQ is a worthy addition to this Ubiquinol and Shilajit fulvic stack because it also helps with mitochondrial biogenesis. So PQQ has actually been shown to increase mitochondrial function directly by increasing the amount of mitochondria that you have in cells. So now you improve the electron transfer in the proton pump of mitochondria, but you also create more mitochondria, within your body, allowing for more ATP production. Now, there's a lot of benefits of PQQ, which stands for, and I need to use a cue card because this word is almost impossible to pronounce, Pyrroloquinoline, Quinone. Pyrroloquinoline, Quinone. PQQ. Who comes up with these words, guys? Quinone. Easy. PQQ. Okay. So a combination of PQQ on top of Ubiquinol and Shilajit fulvic acid increases exercise performance further because now you allow for more ATP production with an increased amount of mitochondria. And of course, Ubiquinol optimizes the electron transfer in the proton pump. Besides increased exercise performance, PQQ has a lot of other benefits which could help with anti-aging, like improving glutathione concentrations by inhibiting glutathione reductase enzymes or acting as an antioxidant. It's a worthy supplement to dive into. Dosages vary between 20 to 40 milligrams PQQ alongside 100 to 400 milligrams of Ubiquinol and 250 milligrams of Shilajit fulvic acid about 1 hour pre-workout. That's a pretty solid stack. So let's say you do 400 milligrams of Ubiquinol, I would do 40 milligrams of PQQ. But you would continue with the PQQ on a daily basis because it's the duration of PQQ supplementation that contributes to mitochondrial biogenesis highly. And I would ideally recommend 20 milligrams as a maintenance dose. And then maybe on the days that you take 400 milligrams of Ubiquinol on your strenuous workouts like legs or back, for example, you increase the dose of PQQ to 40 milligrams. But I would suggest a 20 milligram maintenance dose that you run all the way through. And of course, on the days you don't train, you would simply space your Ubiquinol to 100 milligrams AM and 100 milligrams PM for overall anti-aging and health purposes. So that optimizes mitochondrial function in order to increase the electron transfer in the mitochondrial proton pump further when we're taking Ubiquinol and PQQ and Shilajit fulvic acid. Consider a very simple thing you can find everywhere in any grocery store, and that's diet tonic water or regular tonic water if your diet model allows for another 30 or 50 grams of carbohydrates, which might increase your exercise performance also. Again, it's just simple carbohydrates, which is fuel for ATP production also. Now, what quinine does, which is found in tonic water, it optimizes electron transfer and electrolyte balance within the intercellular and extracellular space. You can combine that with taurine, which helps with osmotic pressure, which is the water balance between the intracellular and extracellular space. And of course, electrolytes are suspended in water, so why not optimize both? 5,000 milligrams of taurine pre-workout and 1 can of tonic water or diet tonic water pre-workout, which will give you about 20 to 25 milligrams of quinine, which is sufficient to optimize electrolyte balance and optimize electron transfer in the proton pump of the mitochondria. Man, it gets so complicated, right? I hope you guys are still with me. So, Ubiquinol, Shilajit fulvic acid, PQQ, taurine, and quinine coming from tonic water will optimize mitochondrial ATP production for the most amount of energy during the workout, besides, the conventional creatine, which converts into creatine phosphate, which then donates a phosphate group to adenosine, converting into adenosine monophosphate or Tri-Phosphate, which yields the most amount of energy. See, so it's this good old creatine monohydrate. Now, we have the acidity of the skeletal muscle under control. We have the ATP production under control. Now, this combination should already give you a noticeable boost in training performance and workout capacity, and should also make you feel a lot less fatigued towards the end of your workout, allowing you to train with maximum intensity, just like at the start of your workout. Because you're optimizing heart function, you're optimizing mitochondrial function, and you're optimizing the acid buffer in skeletal muscle and in the bloodstream, allowing for detoxification of lactic acid. Now, in order to improve heart functioning further, consider the beta blocker Nebivolol in combination with 100 to 400 milligrams of Ubiquinol, 250 milligrams of Shilajit fulvic acid, and 20 to 40 milligrams of PQQ, 2.5 to 5 milligrams of Nebivolol, upon waking. You don't necessarily need to take that pre-workout because it has a pretty long active life, so you can just take that in the morning with all of your other supplements or PEDs that you like to take in the morning. Nebivolol keeps your heart rate down, allowing for a shorter rest period in between sets. And again, you're not wasting energy on your heart, even though you're supplying plenty of energy production for the heart with Ubiquinol, Shilajit, Fulvic acid, and PQQ. Now, the heart is really not the rate limiting factor anymore, and it's your muscles and your mind allowing you to train at, the pain threshold or slightly over it. A combination of Nebivolol, Ubiquinol, Shilajit, Fulvic acid, and PQQ also has a very positive effect on heart remodeling when your heart is enlarged or you're suffering from left ventricle hypertrophy, which is actually very, very common in the bodybuilding space and the fitness space, whether that's due to performance-enhancing drugs or high blood pressure or just training, at maximum capacity, which already increases your heart rate. And now your heart has to contract against this increased heart rate, which slowly gives you an athlete's heart. I mean, it's a very common condition. Athlete's heart is not really bad. It's just the result of training insane or having, an increased heart rate for a prolonged period of time, like you see in certain endurance sports. And Nebivolol, Ubiquinol, Shilajit, Fulvic acid, and PQQ can all contribute, especially in combination, to positive remodeling. So you don't get into a weird situation where you have heart backflow or terrible left ventricle heart enlargement due to some of the performance-enhancing drugs that are common in this space. It's a worthy addition, and I can highly advise you watch this video about Nebivolol to see how it contributes and how it stacks up as a performance-enhancing drug, again, because it does increase exercise performance. Some of most of the beta blockers will, tremendously diminish exercise performance, but Nebivolol can contribute. I can highly suggest you give it a try if you're training at maximum capacity. Otherwise, it's pretty much useless. Before we get into supplying ATP directly, I just want to mention that PQQ, sodium bicarbonate, and of course creatine, which donates a phosphate group to adenosine in the formation of ATP and AMP. All these three supplements are known to increase serum creatinine concentrations. So again, it's a metabolic waste product in ATP production and protein metabolism in skeletal muscle. And as your skeletal muscle increase, so will your serum creatinine concentrations. Now, I'm sure most of you guys already know that serum creatinine is not really indicative of kidney health, especially if you're a bodybuilder and you should just check your cystatin C, which is more indicative of kidney health. It's a gold standard if you want to check your kidney function. But if you want to make sure your serum creatinine levels stay under control, I can highly recommend a supplement called Astragalus root extract, which is known to take a couple points off your total creatinine concentrations in the bloodstream by optimizing kidney function. So again, we're trying to get rid of all these metabolic waste products, and promoting excretion through the kidneys is highly advised. Astragalus root extract is one of the few over-the-counter supplements that can actually help you with this. That's optimizing the natural pathways. Let's get into the performance-enhancing drug aspect of this video by just supplying ATP directly. You can buy injectable adenosine monophosphate or injectable adenosine triphosphate and just use that as a direct method to supply a lot of energy for the muscle that you're training. Now, before you consider injectable AMP or injectable ATP, keep in mind that both are vasodilators. And you don't want too much vasodilation during the workout, even though it's highly beneficial because it keeps your blood pressure in check when you train insane. By increasing cyclic guanosine monophosphate concentrations, you're basically following the same pathway as a PDE5 inhibitor like Cialis or Viagra or Levitra. So if you're considering injectable ATP or AMP, do not take that in combination with a PDE5 inhibitor like Cialis, Viagra, or Levitra. So take that out first. even though you're injecting the ATP or AMP intramuscularly in the muscle you're going to train, because you want to supply this ATP locally, not systemically. Now, what we do in bodybuilding competition, we might inject a bolus amount of AMP for vasodilation and allow for a more pumped and full appearance. Those are pretty high dosages, varying between 200 milligrams to 400 milligrams of AMP injected into the glute in a single administration, usually before the prejudging. But if you do a conservative low dose, intramuscularly around, like double digits, let's say 50 milligrams, 40 milligrams of AMP or ATP, bilaterally into the muscle you're going to train. And feel free to combine that with your carnosine injection to limit the amount of scar tissue that you're going to build up. So let's say 50 milligrams ATP or AMP and 50 to 100 milligrams or maybe a little bit of more carnosine in a single injection. Yes, it will hurt, but it's better than 2 injections bilaterally. That's already 2 injections, so you don't want to do 4 injections pre-workout. It's cumbersome. So we're going for the most convenient approach here. Now, keep in mind that some of this ATP and AMP that you're injecting will spill over into the bloodstream and lower your blood pressure because it's a vasodilator. So keep that in mind. Don't take this in combination with Cialis, Viagra, or Levitra. I can't emphasize this enough. Nebivolol also lowers blood pressure. Many of the compounds that are found in over-the-counter supplements, over-the-counter pre-workouts, also lower blood pressure. So again, some experimentation of ATP and AMP injectable by itself is advised to see how much of a blood pressure reduction you'll get. Now, some of the underground labs that produce injectable ATP or AMP produce that in combination with a vasoconstrictor called heptaminol, which at the higher dosages might be required. So when you're injecting 200 milligrams or 400 milligrams of injectable ATP, you probably need some heptaminol with that, because the blood pressure reduction that you would get otherwise would be too severe and you would not be able to finish your workouts because you'll be laying on the floor with your legs elevated just to keep a little bit of blood pressure for your brain going. Yeah, it's a pretty hefty pre-workout, and it's not available as an over-the-counter supplement for a reason. So again, guys, caution is highly advised when you go with injectable ATP or AMP, especially in combination with heptaminol, because some guys get too much vasoconstriction from the heptaminol. So ideally, I would do a double-digit dose of injectable ATP or AMP without the heptaminol. Experiment with that first, above and beyond what you're already experimenting with your Ubiquinol, Shilajit fulvic acid, PQQ, Nebivolol, injectable carnosine, and sodium bicarbonate combination. So start low, build up as needed to your point you get some vasodilation that's intolerable. Ideally, before you get to a point where you need to discontinue your workouts, and then maybe consider an injectable ATP or AMP formulation with heptaminol, allowing you to go up until a higher dose. But again, not everybody responds well to heptaminol and get too much vasoconstriction in return. And please don't go crazy and start combining Cialis with injectable ATP or AMP with heptaminol and using an angiotensin II receptor blocker or an ACE inhibitor or Nebivolol or everything under the sun that contributes to vasodilation and vasoconstriction directly. Again, some of the, over-the-counter supplements contain caffeine and other compounds that contribute to vasoconstriction as well. Don't mess with that. Not 5 signals for vasodilation and 5 signals for vasoconstriction. Your body will get confused and you will feel absolutely terrible as a result of it. And I really hope that helps. Thank you guys so much for watching. Vigorous crew, you guys know what to do. Hope you enjoy your workout. See you in the next video.